They said a man could buy a cow that morning and take a woman home for free. By sunset, no one in Dry Creek would dare repeat those words again. Before this story rides any farther, remember one thing. The frontier has always had a strange way of revealing a person's worth. Not when his pockets are full, not when everyone is cheering his name, but in the quiet moment when doing what is right costs more than he can afford. The summer sun hung mercilessly above Dry Creek, bleaching every rooftop until the town looked carved from bone instead of timber. Dust drifted lazily through the main street, stirred by restless cattle packed inside rough wooden pens. Horses snorted beneath weathered hitching posts while traders shouted over one another, each voice trying to drown out the next. It smelled of leather, sweat, tobacco, and fresh hay, the scent of another ordinary auction day on the American frontier. Except nothing about that morning would remain ordinary. Elias Mercer guided his aging bay horse into town without haste. His coat had been patched too many times to count, his hat faded nearly white beneath years of relentless sun. Few people noticed him. Fewer still greeted him. That suited Elias just fine. He had come for one reason: a milk cow. His ranch sat nearly 40 miles beyond the western ridge, where drought had claimed half his herd before spring had even ended. One healthy cow could mean another season survived. One mistake could mean losing everything his father had built with calloused hands and silent determination. He tied his horse beside the trading yard and counted the coins inside his worn leather pouch. Just enough. Not 1 cent more. The auctioneer climbed onto a wooden platform, wiping sweat from his neck before slamming the handle of his gavel against the railing. Ladies and gentlemen, finest livestock this side of the Arkansas. The crowd answered with laughter. One by one, cattle changed hands. Prices climbed. Arguments flared. Coins clinked against wooden tables. Elias waited patiently, saying almost nothing. Then 2 ranch hands dragged a large brown dairy cow toward the center pen. Strong legs, clear eyes, healthy coat. Exactly what he needed. The bidding began. Elias raised one finger. Another man countered. The price climbed again. His fingers tightened around the leather pouch. One final bid. Silence. The auctioneer grinned. Sold. Relief settled quietly inside Elias, until another voice echoed across the square. Hold on. A merchant wearing an expensive black vest climbed onto the platform, carrying a folded document in one hand. His smile spread slowly as several men leaned forward, curious. I almost forgot today's special offer. The laughter started before anyone understood. The merchant pointed toward a wagon parked beneath an old cottonwood tree. 2 guards pulled back the canvas covering. A young Apache woman stood inside. Her wrists were not chained. They did not need to be. The hopelessness in her eyes had become a prison stronger than iron. She stood perfectly still, dressed in a faded buckskin dress marked by weeks of travel. Wind lifted loose strands of raven-black hair across a face that carried neither fear nor tears. Only exhaustion. Only silence. The merchant threw one arm toward her like a carnival performer presenting another prize. Buy the cow. The crowd leaned closer. And take the Apache girl free. Roars of laughter exploded through the square. Someone whistled. Another shouted, best bargain all year. Even men who knew better laughed simply because everyone else did. Naya lowered her eyes to the wagon floor. Not in surrender. In dignity. She refused to watch strangers measure her value. The merchant looked directly at Elias. Well, cowboy? Looks like fortune smiled on you today. Every face turned toward the quiet rancher. The laughter slowly faded. Dust drifted between them. A loose shutter creaked somewhere across the street. Elias looked first at the cow, then at the frightened young woman. His expression never changed. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm enough to disappear beneath the wind. I came to buy livestock. He reached into his pocket, removed every coin he possessed, and placed them gently upon the auction table. But no human being has ever been free. For the first time that morning, Dry Creek became completely silent. Silence can wound a person more deeply than chains. And as the people of Dry Creek stared at the Apache woman without saying a word, Elias Mercer realized she had been in prison long before anyone forced her into that wagon. No one applauded his words. No one argued with them either. The silence that settled across the auction yard carried more weight than the merchant's laughter ever had. Dust floated between boots and wagon wheels while somewhere behind the livery stable, A horse stamped nervously against the hard-packed earth. The merchant's smile slowly disappeared. He looked down at the stack of silver coins Elias had placed on the auction table, then back at the cowboy whose expression refused to change. "You paid for the cow," he said at last. "The girl costs nothing." Elias met his eyes. "That's exactly the problem." A ripple spread through the crowd. Some frowned. Others chuckled uneasily, uncertain whether the joke had ended or only begun. Sheriff Amos Grady stood beneath the porch of the general store, one thumb hooked behind his gun belt. He had watched the entire exchange without moving a single step. His weathered face betrayed nothing, but his eyes lingered on the young Apache woman longer than before. The merchant laughed again, louder this time, trying to recover the crowd. "She's not my daughter." He shrugged. "She's not even my servant. Just part of the shipment." Several ranchers burst into laughter. One slapped another across the shoulder. "Take her, cowboy. You'll never get a better bargain." Someone farther back shouted, "Maybe she'll cook better than she speaks." More laughter followed. Only one person never looked up. Naya. She remained standing inside the wagon, hands folded quietly before her. Wind carried strands of black hair across her face, hiding eyes that had long ago learned not to search for kindness in strangers. Humiliation had become familiar. That frightened Elias more than anything. People should never grow accustomed to being treated like objects. He stepped closer to the wagon. Slowly, carefully, as one might approach a wounded horse. Naya lifted her gaze for the first time. Her eyes were neither pleading nor grateful. Only tired. Deep beneath the exhaustion lay something else. Pride. It had survived everything. Whoever she had once been, the world had failed to erase it completely. The merchant unfolded a stained document from his pocket. "Since everyone suddenly cares about principles." He waved the paper. "Here. This Indian woman was transferred to my trading company nearly 3 months ago, after her caravan collapsed outside Fort Stanton." He tapped the page. No family. No property. No claim. No one came looking. A few men nodded as though paperwork could measure a person's soul. Elias held out his hand. "Let me see it." The merchant hesitated before passing over the folded sheet. It wasn't a bill of sale. Not exactly. Several names had been crossed out. Dates scratched away. Different handwriting filled the margins. One sentence caught Elias immediately. "Temporary labor pending relocation." Temporary. Someone had altered the meaning afterward. Fresh ink covered older words. He looked up. "Who changed this?" The merchant snatched the document back. "Doesn't matter. It belongs to me now." Before Elias could answer, an elderly blacksmith pushed through the gathering crowd. Old Henry Collins had lived in Dry Creek longer than anyone still breathing. His gray eyebrows knitted together the moment he saw the young woman. "I've seen her before," he muttered. The merchant turned sharply. "You've mistaken her." Henry shook his head. "No, not here. Near Fort Stanton." She wasn't alone. The old man's voice slowed as forgotten memories returned. There was an older Apache woman with her. A healer. She treated my grandson after a rattlesnake bite. I offered money. She refused every dollar. The crowd grew quieter. Henry stared at Naya again. "The younger one." She translated. The merchant interrupted before anyone else could speak. "Stories. Old men remember ghosts." He climbed back onto the auction platform and struck the railing with his gavel. "The auction is over. Take your cow and leave." But Elias never moved. Instead, his eyes followed Naya as she slowly stepped down from the wagon under the watch of 2 armed guards. She walked with remarkable dignity despite wearing boots that were clearly too large, their cracked leather rubbing against ankles already marked by weeks of travel. Then something happened so quickly that almost no one noticed. As she passed beside Elias, a small object slipped silently from her sleeve into the dust. She never looked back. Neither guard noticed. Only Elias did. After the wagon rolled away and the crowd began scattering toward the saloon, he bent down and picked it up. It was a tiny silver pendant. On its worn surface was carved a single hawk rising toward the sun. Along its edge, barely visible beneath years of scratches, someone had engraved 3 words. "Return her with honor." Elias closed his hand around the pendant. For the first time that day, he understood one simple truth. The woman they had laughed at had never belonged to anyone. Sometimes the most expensive thing a man can buy is another person's freedom. And Elias Mercer was about to discover that freedom carried a price no ledger could measure. The silver pendant remained warm inside his palm as the afternoon sun drifted lower over Dry Creek. The crowd had already forgotten the auction. Men wandered toward the saloon. Wagons rolled west beneath clouds of red dust. Cattle lowed impatiently inside emptying pens. Only Elias stayed where he was. His eyes followed the merchant's wagon until it disappeared beyond the freight office. He slipped the pendant into his coat pocket. Then he led his newly purchased cow across the street. Instead of heading home, he walked toward the land registry. The small office smelled of old paper, lamp oil, and cedar shelves polished by decades of use. Behind a scarred oak desk sat Miriam Harlow, the town clerk, a widow whose spectacles rested low upon her nose. She looked up as Elias entered. "Back already? I need information." She folded her hands patiently. "About what?" He placed the folded pendant onto her desk. No. He changed his mind. He reached instead for the memory that refused to leave him. The Apache Woman. Miriam's expression stiffened. I wondered who would ask first. She unlocked a narrow cabinet and removed a weathered ledger nearly 5 inches thick. Dust drifted into the afternoon light as she carefully opened it. There wasn't much paperwork. There usually isn't. Her fingers stopped halfway through the book. Naya. She spoke the name quietly. Recorded 3 months ago. Transferred with a merchant caravan after an attack south of Fort Stanton. Elias frowned. Transferred from whom? Miriam hesitated. There isn't a name. Only a note. She slid the ledger toward him. The ink had faded, but one sentence remained perfectly clear. Survivor. Awaiting tribal identification. Elias looked up. That's not ownership. No, it isn't. Then how did she become merchandise? The widow slowly removed her spectacles. Because no one objected. Those 4 words settled heavily inside the room. Outside, a wagon rattled over loose stones. Someone laughed from across the street. Life continued exactly as before. Inside the office, neither of them spoke. Finally, Miriam reached beneath the desk and produced another folded document. I shouldn't show you this. She handed it over anyway. The paper carried the faded seal of Fort Stanton. Official notice. Missing persons. One line had been scratched through so aggressively the parchment had nearly torn. Female Apache translator. Approximately 24 years old. Escort lost during relocation. Must be protected until surviving relatives are located. Protected. Not sold. Not traded. Protected. Someone had erased an entire life with a bottle of fresh ink. Elias carefully folded the paper again. Who signed her over? Miriam answered almost reluctantly. Silas Braddock. The merchant. The name explained everything. Braddock had spent years buying abandoned freight, livestock, and damaged equipment from failed expeditions. If no family appeared to claim something, he claimed it himself. Most people assumed the law favored whoever held the receipt. Few bothered reading the words beneath the signature. Elias thanked Miriam and quietly left. The sun had begun sinking behind the western ridge when he reached the blacksmith's forge. Old Henry Collins hammered glowing steel against an anvil, each strike echoing through the empty street. Without looking up, the old man spoke. You found something. I found questions. Henry nodded slowly. Questions usually lead to expensive answers. Elias removed his father's silver pocket watch from his vest. The polished case reflected the orange firelight. It was the only valuable thing he owned. His father had carried it through 27 cattle drives. His mother had wound it every Sunday evening until the day she died. Henry recognized it immediately. No. The old blacksmith stopped hammering. Don't ask. I need money. You need patience. I need enough to buy someone's freedom before she's sold somewhere no one will ever find her. The forge fell silent. Henry stared at the watch for a very long time. Then he opened a small iron cash box beneath his workbench. Every coin inside represented years of honest labor. He pushed the entire box toward Elias. Your father once saved my life during the winter of '61. I've owed your family ever since. Elias shook his head. I can't take charity. Henry smiled faintly. It isn't charity. It's a debt. Elias placed the pocket watch gently on the workbench anyway. If I don't return, keep it. The old blacksmith closed his rough hand around the watch, but never looked at the money. Instead, he watched Elias walk into the deepening twilight toward the freight warehouse where Silas Braddock kept those things, and those people he believed could be bought. The easiest prison to escape is one built from wood. The hardest is the one built from fear. Before dawn, Elias Mercer would unlock the first. The second would prove far more difficult. Night settled over Dry Creek with the slow certainty of desert winter. Oil lamps flickered behind dusty windows, throwing long golden rectangles across empty boardwalks. Piano music drifted from the saloon, broken now and then by drunken laughter that echoed through streets already surrendering to darkness. Behind the freight warehouse, no one laughed. 2 lanterns burned beside a rough wooden corral enclosed by a high fence. Mules slept beneath canvas shelters while stacks of supply crates cast deep black shadows across the yard. At the far end stood a weather-beaten bunkhouse. One window glowed faintly. Elias remained motionless beneath the branches of a cottonwood, watching. 2 guards. One walked the fence every few minutes. The other sat outside the door with a whiskey bottle resting across his knee. Neither looked particularly interested in protecting anyone. They were protecting property, or at least they believed they were. Elias waited until the church bell struck midnight. The older guard yawned. The younger wandered toward the privy behind the stable. For less than 30 seconds, the doorway stood alone. Elias crossed the yard without making a sound. Years of trailing frightened cattle across Dry Creek beds had taught him where wood groaned and where dirt swallowed footsteps. His boots found only silence. He reached the bunkhouse door. Unlocked. He slipped inside. The room smelled of damp blankets, cedar walls, and cold ashes. Moonlight spilled through a narrow window, tracing pale lines across the wooden floor. Naya sat awake in one corner. She had not been sleeping. She looked at him once, then quietly lowered her eyes. No surprise, no relief, only careful observation. She had learned that unexpected visitors after midnight rarely carried good news. Elias stopped several feet away, keeping his hands visible. I didn't come to hurt you. She studied him. The silence stretched until the wind outside rattled the shutters. Finally she spoke. Her English carried only the faintest trace of an Apache accent. I know. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. You were the man at the auction. He nodded. I found this. Slowly he removed the silver pendant from his pocket. The instant she saw it, something changed behind her eyes. Not fear. Recognition. She reached toward it but stopped halfway, her hand trembling ever so slightly. My grandmother made that. She whispered the words as though afraid speaking louder might break them. I thought it was gone. Elias placed the pendant gently into her open palm. She closed her fingers around it and shut her eyes. For the first time since he had seen her, her shoulders relaxed. Only a little. Only for a moment. I came because you're leaving. He held up a folded document. The clerk showed me. Enough to know you were never supposed to be sold. Naya stared at the paper without touching it. It doesn't matter. It does. She slowly shook her head. You still believe papers decide things. My people stopped believing that years ago. Outside, someone coughed. A chair scraped across the porch. The guard. Tom was slipping away. Elias lowered his voice. I can buy your release. A faint smile crossed her face. Not joyful. Almost sad. Can you buy trust? The question caught him completely unprepared. She looked directly into his eyes. If you pay him, he will simply sell someone else tomorrow. If you take me, people will believe he owned me. The words settled heavily between them. She was right. Buying her freedom could also make the lie appear true. Elias had never considered that. She rose slowly to her feet. Despite weeks of captivity, she carried herself with quiet dignity that no chain could have created or destroyed. My grandmother taught me something. If a man protects your body, but not your name, he has only saved half of you. Elias lowered his eyes. Then he unfolded the second document Miriam had given him. The original protection order. I don't intend to buy you. He met her gaze again. I intend to prove he never owned you. For the first time, Naya looked at him not as another stranger, but as a man who had finally understood the difference. Before either of them could speak again, heavy footsteps stopped outside the bunkhouse door. Then came the unmistakable sound of a key sliding into the lock. A single lie can survive for years, but it only takes one honest man refusing to step aside for the lie to become frightened. The key turned once. Metal scraped against metal. Elias folded the protection order before the door swung inward. The younger guard stepped inside, carrying a lantern whose yellow light spilled across the small room. His eyes stopped first on Naya, then on Elias. "What are you doing here?" His voice rose sharply. "I came to speak." At midnight. The guard reached instinctively toward the revolver hanging at his hip. "You've got 3 seconds to explain yourself." Elias remained perfectly still. "I found documents proving she's under federal protection." The guard laughed. "Federal paper doesn't mean much out here." "It should." "It doesn't." The second guard appeared behind him, older, broader across the shoulders, smelling strongly of whiskey. He glanced between the two of them before grinning. "Looks like the cowboy fell in love." Both men laughed. Naya never moved. She simply watched. She had seen men mock kindness before. Mockery usually came before violence. The older guard stepped closer until he stood only inches from Elias. "You paid for your cow. You didn't pay for her." "I wasn't trying to." "Then leave." "I will." Elias held the folded paper higher. "After I deliver this to the territorial judge tomorrow morning." The laughter disappeared, only for a heartbeat. Then the older guard snatched the document from Elias's hand and unfolded it carelessly. He barely glanced at the writing before tearing the page cleanly down the middle. Once, twice, again. Small pieces drifted across the wooden floor like dead leaves. "There." He smiled. "Now there isn't any paper." The room fell silent. Elias looked down at the torn fragments. His jaw tightened, but he never reached for his gun, never raised a fist. Instead, he bent slowly and gathered every piece. One by one. The older guard watched with open amusement. "You always this calm?" Elias answered without looking up. "My father taught me. If another man destroys the truth, that doesn't make it disappear." Outside, church bells announced 1 o'clock. The younger guard suddenly shifted uneasily. "We should let him go." The older man shrugged. "Fine." He pointed toward the door. "But if I see you near this warehouse again." He rested his hand on the revolver. "I'll stop asking questions." Elias tucked the torn papers carefully into his coat. Before leaving, he looked once more at Naya. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The pendant around her neck caught the lantern light for a single heartbeat. Then the door closed between them. Morning arrived beneath gray clouds. Dry Creek woke early. Not because of cattle, because rumors traveled faster than horses. By breakfast, everyone had heard a different version of the same story. The cowboy tried stealing the Indian. He sneaked into Braddock's warehouse. He threatened the guards. He finally lost his mind. Each telling grew larger. Each lie became easier to believe. When Elias entered the mercantile to buy flour, conversation stopped. The shopkeeper avoided his eyes. "We're closed." "You sold coffee 5 minutes ago." "We're closed to you." Across the street, the blacksmith's apprentice quietly looked away. The barber suddenly found another customer. Children whispered as he walked past. Some adults whispered louder. "Traitor." "Indian lover." "Fool." The words followed him through town like dust behind a wagon. Near noon, Sheriff Amos Grady intercepted him outside the courthouse. The old lawman removed his hat. "I've known you nearly 10 years. I know. You've never caused trouble." "I haven't." The sheriff sighed deeply. "Then leave this alone." Elias studied the weathered face before him. "Do you believe she's property?" Grady didn't answer immediately. His silence lasted long enough to become an answer itself. Finally he spoke. "I believe this town has decided what it wants to believe." "And you?" The sheriff looked toward the freight warehouse, standing quietly at the edge of town. Then back at Elias. "I've spent 30 years keeping peace." Elias shook his head gently. "No. You've spent 30 years keeping people comfortable." He walked away before the sheriff could respond. High above Dry Creek, dark clouds gathered over the western mountains. The wind changed direction, and somewhere far beyond the horizon, horsemen had already begun riding toward the town. Truth rarely announces itself with shouting. More often, it waits inside an old box, beneath years of dust, until someone brave enough opens the lid. The storm arrived before sunset. Cold wind swept across the prairie, bending tall grass into silver waves while heavy clouds swallowed the last traces of blue sky. Elias rode west instead of returning home, following directions only one person in Dry Creek had remembered. Fort Stanton Cemetery. Not the graves. The abandoned mission beside them. Old Henry's words echoed in his mind. The healer kept records. If anyone still knows who that girl is, it'll be there. The mission had been empty for nearly a decade. Its roof sagged beneath years of neglect, and ivy climbed through broken windows where stained glass once reflected morning prayers. Rain dripped steadily through cracked beams onto a floor scattered with yellowed books and overturned furniture. Everything smelled of mildew and forgotten history. Elias pushed open a warped cedar cabinet. Inside rested dozens of leather journals wrapped carefully in faded cloth. Someone had wanted them to survive. He lit a lantern. Hours passed. Page after page described births, illnesses, medicine gathered beneath different moons, settlers, Apache families, Mexican traders, children. No distinction, no hatred, only names, only lives. Then one journal stopped him. Its cover bore the same hawk carved upon Naya's pendant. He opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was elegant, deliberate. The first page carried a single sentence. Healing belongs to everyone. Signed, Sahani. The name meant nothing to Elias. Yet every page that followed slowly reshaped everything he thought he knew. Sahani had traveled freely between Apache camps and frontier settlements for nearly 20 years. She had treated wounded soldiers after skirmishes, delivered ranchers' children during difficult winters, saved miners suffering from fever, refused payment every time. Beside many entries appeared another name. Naya, age 12, age 15, age 18, translator, student, apprentice. The young woman had spoken English, Spanish, and Apache long before anyone in Dry Creek had ever seen her. She hadn't been following the healer. She had been becoming one. Near the end of the journal, Elias found a folded letter tucked between brittle pages. The paper had darkened with age. The seal remained unbroken. Addressed simply, "To whoever protects my granddaughter." His hands paused. Carefully he broke the wax. The letter was brief. "If you are reading this, then I have likely failed to return. My granddaughter carries knowledge that cannot be replaced. Many will value her hands. Few will value her heart. If the world ever treats her as property, remember this. A healer belongs to no tribe, no government, no owner, only to those in need. Protect her dignity before you protect her life. Without dignity, life becomes another prison." Elias slowly lowered the letter. Outside, thunder rolled across distant hills. Rain struck the old roof harder now. He understood at last why Naya had looked so deeply wounded when men laughed at the auction. They had not merely insulted her. They had erased generations of sacrifice. They had mocked the granddaughter of a woman who had spent decades saving people exactly like them. A sudden creak echoed behind him. Elias turned. Father Benjamin stood quietly in the doorway. The elderly priest had remained caretaker of the abandoned mission long after everyone else had left. His white beard glistened with rainwater. I wondered who would come looking. "You knew Sahani?" The old priest smiled softly. "I buried her." Silence settled between them. After a long moment the priest spoke again. "Before she died, she made me promise something." He walked to a weathered chest hidden beneath the altar. Lifting the lid revealed a neatly folded buckskin pouch wrapped in blue cloth. Inside rested dozens of letters, every one signed by settlers, sheriffs, doctors, army officers, each thanking Sahani for saving a husband, a daughter, a stranger. Father Benjamin handed the bundle to Elias. "These are witnesses." They forgot, but the paper remembered. Lightning flashed beyond the broken windows. For one brilliant instant the faded hawk emblem gleamed against the leather pouch. Elias tied it carefully behind his saddle. When he stepped back into the storm, he no longer carried hope alone. He carried proof. And somewhere inside Dry Creek, Silas Braddock had just received a telegram that made the color drain from his face. The men of Dry Creek expected an army to arrive with war cries. Instead, what came over the western ridge was something far more unsettling. Silence. The first rider appeared just after sunrise. Then another. Then 5 more. They emerged through the morning mist one by one, their horses moving with steady, unhurried purpose. No banners flew above them. No rifles were raised. Even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb their approach. Old Mrs. Parker was hanging laundry when she saw them first. Her clothespins slipped from trembling fingers. Within minutes, every bell in Dry Creek was ringing. Apache riders. They're coming. Doors slammed shut. Curtains closed. Merchants abandoned their storefronts. Children were pulled indoors by frightened mothers. By the time Elias reached the edge of town, more than 100 riders stood upon the ridge overlooking Dry Creek. 100. Perhaps more. No one could count them accurately because they never stopped arriving. Yet something felt strangely wrong. Or perhaps strangely right. None of them carried bows in their hands. No rifles pointed toward town. No painted faces prepared for battle. Instead, every rider wore a narrow strip of white cloth tied around one arm, a color of peace. Sheriff Amos Grady climbed onto the wooden water tower platform, spyglass trembling slightly in his weathered hands. They're not forming a battle line. Someone beside him whispered. Then why are they here? No one answered. Because no one knew. Silas Braddock knew. The merchant burst from his office with panic written plainly across his face. Sweat soaked through his expensive vest despite the cool morning air. He clutched yesterday's telegram tightly enough to wrinkle the paper beyond recognition. He had read it at least 20 times. The message contained only 9 words. The healer's granddaughter has been found. Elders are coming. Nothing else. Nothing was necessary. Braddock immediately barked orders toward his guards. Move the girl. Now. Get her out the back road. The younger guard hesitated. Where? I don't care. Just disappear until they leave. The men hurried toward the warehouse. But someone was already standing outside. Elias Mercer. His horse waited quietly beside him. The leather pouch containing Sahani's journals rested beneath his arm. Braddock stopped walking. You. His voice cracked. This isn't your affair anymore. Elias answered calmly. It became my affair the moment you called a human being merchandise. Braddock forced himself to laugh. You've got no proof. Elias slowly untied the leather bundle. Letters spilled across the hood of an old freight wagon. Dozens. Army officers. Doctors. Judges. Settlers. Every signature belonged to someone respected across the territory. Sheriff Grady stepped closer. What is all this? The truth. Elias handed him Sahani's final letter. The sheriff read silently. His weathered hands began shaking. Not from fear. From shame. He looked toward Braddock. You told us she was abandoned. Braddock swallowed hard. I bought legal custody. You bought forged papers. Elias replied quietly. The merchant's confidence disappeared completely. He lunged forward, attempting to seize the journals. Before his fingers touched the leather, another sound rolled across the valley. Not a war cry. A single deep drumbeat. Boom. Every Apache rider stopped at exactly the same moment. Boom. One elder rode slowly down from the ridge alone. His hair shone silver beneath the morning light. He carried no weapon. Only a carved cedar staff wrapped with white eagle feathers. The town held its breath. The elder passed every armed deputy without acknowledging them. He passed Braddock. He passed the sheriff. He passed the mayor. Until finally, he stopped directly before Elias Mercer. For several long seconds, neither man spoke. Wind carried dust gently between them. Then the elder looked at the worn leather pouch beneath Elias's arm. His tired eyes softened. You found her grandmother. It was not a question. Elias nodded once. The old man placed one weathered hand over his own heart. Then, before the eyes of the entire town, the Apache elder slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Behind him, 100 mounted riders did exactly the same. Not a single weapon left its holster. Not a single voice broke the silence. Only the sound of leather creaking as proud warriors bowed their heads before one quiet cowboy who had chosen another person's dignity over his own comfort. And in that breathtaking silence, every lie Dry Creek had believed began collapsing without a single shot being fired. Power reveals itself in many ways. Some men raise a rifle to prove they are strong. Others kneel and remind the world what true strength has always looked like. No one in Dry Creek breathed. 100 Apache riders remained on one knee. The old elder still bowed his head before Elias Mercer, as though honoring something far greater than a single man. The silence became almost unbearable. Finally, the elder rose. His movements were slow, careful, touched by the weight of many winters. My name is Dakota. His English carried the rhythm of someone who had spoken several languages for a lifetime. I was the student of Sahani. His weathered eyes drifted toward the leather journals resting beneath Elias's arm. You carried her voice home. Then he turned, not toward Elias, toward the frightened townspeople gathered behind the sheriff. I did not come for revenge. His calm voice carried across the square without effort. I came because a promise has waited 23 years. Confused whispers spread through the crowd. Dakota reached inside his buckskin satchel. He removed an aged wooden box bound with faded rawhide straps. The carving upon its lid matched the hawk engraved on Naya's pendant. He placed it gently upon the ground. No one opens this box, except the one who protects her dignity. He stepped back. Every eye turned toward Elias. Even Braddock stared without blinking. Elias knelt slowly. The leather straps had grown brittle with time. He loosened them carefully. Inside rested three things: a folded map, a silver medicine necklace, and another sealed letter. The paper had yellowed with age, yet the wax seal remained untouched. Across the front, written in elegant handwriting, were 6 simple words: "For the man who chooses honor." Elias looked toward Dakota. The elder nodded once. "Read." Breaking the seal almost felt like disturbing history itself. The letter was written by Sahani. "If these words have reached you, then my granddaughter is no longer alone. Know this: long before this town existed, our people agreed to protect every traveler who crossed this valley. When sickness came, we healed strangers before healing ourselves. When children were hungry, we shared our winter stores. We asked for nothing. One day, someone would forget. Another would remember. If the man reading this chose dignity instead of profit, then the promise survives. Please accept what was always intended." Elias unfolded the map. Gasps escaped several townspeople. The boundaries marked upon the parchment surrounded nearly the entire Dry Creek Valley. Every ranch, every well, every pasture, every building. Sheriff Grady stared at the survey markings. "I know that seal." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "The Territorial Survey Office." Dakota nodded. "Signed before the railroad." The old elder looked across the town. "Our people gave this valley to the settlers as a place where families could live together. We kept only one condition." His eyes found Braddock. "No human life would ever be bought or sold upon this land." Silas Braddock staggered backward. His face had turned almost white. The sheriff slowly removed his badge. Not in resignation. In reflection, he looked at the merchant. "You violated the oldest agreement this valley has." Braddock shook his head desperately. "I didn't know." Dakota answered gently. "You never asked." The words landed harder than any accusation. Naya was led quietly from the warehouse by the younger guard. No chains, no ropes. She walked into the center of the square with calm dignity, the silver pendant resting once more against her chest. When she saw the open wooden box, tears filled her eyes for the first time. Not from fear, from memory. Dakota smiled warmly. "Your grandmother trusted the future." Then he turned toward Elias once more. "The valley, the map, the agreement. Everything inside this box. It belongs to you now." A murmur swept through Dry Creek. One decision, one signature, one word from Elias, and he could become the rightful owner of land worth more than anything he had ever imagined. Every eye waited for his answer. Even Naya held her breath. Because sometimes, the greatest test of a person's character arrives only after justice has already been placed in his hands. The richest man is not the one who owns the most land. It is the one who can walk away from it without losing himself. The entire valley waited. Wind rolled gently across the open square, lifting dust around Elias Mercer's boots while the old map rested quietly in his hands. Every eye remained fixed upon him. The mayor imagined losing the town. The ranchers imagined losing their homes. Silas Braddock imagined prison. Sheriff Amos Grady imagined every mistake he had ignored over 30 years. Only Naya watched Elias himself. Not the map, not the land, only the man. Dakota spoke softly. "By the promise of our ancestors. The choice is yours." Elias looked across Dry Creek. The weathered church, the schoolhouse, the blacksmith's forge, children peeking from behind frightened mothers. Old Henry standing silently beside his anvil. These people had judged him, mocked him, turned him away. Yet they were also families. They were not all guilty. Slowly, he folded the map. Then something happened no one expected. He tore it in half. Gasps swept across the square. He tore it again, then once more, until the old survey lay in dozens of small pieces drifting across the dusty street like autumn leaves. Silas Braddock stared in disbelief. The mayor nearly collapsed. Dakota did not move. He simply smiled. Elias handed the remaining fragments back to the elder. "I want to own a valley that was given as a gift. The promise belongs to everyone. Not me." Silence settled once more. Then Elias turned toward Naya. "I don't want your future. I only wanted it returned to you. Naya stepped closer. For the first time since entering Dry Creek, she smiled without sadness. It was quiet, gentle, almost impossible to notice. Yet somehow, it changed the entire morning. Dakota accepted the torn pieces without regret. The paper is gone. He looked around the square. But the promise remains. He faced Sheriff Grady. Will you keep it? The old lawman slowly removed the star from his vest. He walked to Naya. Then, before the eyes of every citizen, he bowed his head. I failed you. I judged papers. I should have judged people. Naya accepted the apology with a simple nod. Nothing more. Forgiveness, like dignity, rarely needed many words. Two deputies quietly approached Silas Braddock. This time the merchant offered no arguments. No excuses. Only lowered eyes. As they led him away, no one celebrated. Justice did not require applause. It only required arrival. 3 weeks later, the prairie looked different beneath early autumn light. Golden grass stretched toward distant mountains where the first snow already touched the highest peaks. Outside Elias's modest ranch house, a familiar brown dairy cow grazed peacefully beside the fence. Life had returned to its ordinary rhythm. Almost. A second horse now stood beneath the cottonwood tree. Naya had chosen to stay. Not because anyone had rescued her. Not because she owed a debt. Because she had found something rarer than safety. Respect. She rebuilt the abandoned mission with Father Benjamin, turning it into a small clinic where settlers, travelers, ranch hands, and Apache families sat beside one another without asking who deserved help first. Old Henry often laughed that people traveled farther for her medicine than they did for the sheriff's protection. Sheriff Grady never argued. He knew it was true. As for Elias, he remained exactly as he had always been. The same faded hat, the same patched coat, the same quiet way of speaking. If strangers asked who owned the largest piece of land near Dry Creek, the townspeople simply smiled. No one. It belongs to a promise. And whenever children asked why an old silver hawk hung above the mission doorway, someone would tell them about the cowboy who refused to accept a woman as part of a bargain. Not because he was fearless, not because he was wealthy, but because, on one ordinary morning beneath a cloudless western sky, he remembered something everyone else had forgotten. Livestock can be bought, land can be traded, paper can be forged, but a human soul has never belonged to the highest bidder. Out on the frontier, justice did not ride in with gunfire. It arrived quietly, wearing a worn-out hat, speaking only when it mattered, and leaving behind a silence that would be remembered long after every echo of laughter had disappeared.